18 years of marriage, and my husband signed the papers to donate my heart while I was still fighting for my life in the ICU. He told the doctors I was brain dead when I wasn't. He forged my signature on organ donation forms I never agreed to. Also, his ex-girlfriend Ashley could get the transplant she desperately needed. I died on that operating table, watching helplessly as they carved out my heart for another woman. But death wasn't the end of my story. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my hospital bed 3 days before the surgery, with all my memories intact and a burning desire for justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the sterile hospital room as I slowly regained consciousness. The familiar antiseptic smell of St. Mary's Medical Center hit my nostrils, and for a moment I thought I was still trapped in that nightmare where David had betrayed me so completely. But as my vision cleared, I noticed something impossible. The calendar on the wall read November 15th, 2023. 3 days before my scheduled surgery. 3 days before my husband would convince Dr. Patricia Morgan that I was ready to give up. I sat up in the hospital bed, my hands immediately going to my chest. My heart was still beating strong and steady beneath my ribs. The incision site was clean, just showing the small marks from the initial biopsy. I was alive. More than that, I was back. The memories came flooding back with crystal clarity. David sitting beside my bed, holding my hand while whispering sweet lies about how much he loved me. Ashley Williams, his high school sweetheart, who had mysteriously reappeared in our lives 6 months ago, supposedly needing a place to stay after her divorce. The woman I had welcomed into our home in Maple Heights, cooking her meals and offering her comfort while she got back on her feet, is the same woman who had been sleeping with my husband for those entire 6 months while I nursed her back to health. But the cruelest betrayal wasn't the affair. It was what happened when my routine checkup revealed the heart condition that would change everything. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, Dr. Morgan had explained gently. My heart muscle was thickening, making it harder for blood to flow. Without treatment, it would eventually lead to heart failure. I needed surgery, possibly even a transplant, if the condition worsened. That's when Ashley's own medical crisis conveniently came to light. She had been hiding her own heart condition, dilated cardiomyopathy, for years. Her heart was failing, and she needed a transplant urgently. What were the odds that 2 women in the same household would both need heart surgery at the same time? I had been naive enough to think it was just terrible luck. Now I knew better. David had orchestrated everything, had known about Ashley's condition long before she moved in with us. He had planned this from the beginning, probably hoping my own heart would deteriorate to the point where I might naturally become a donor. When that didn't happen fast enough, he decided to take matters into his own hands. I remembered lying in this same bed, weak from the pre-surgery medications, when I overheard David talking to Ashley in the hallway. They thought I was unconscious, but the drugs hadn't fully taken effect yet. Their voices carried through the thin hospital walls as they discussed their future together. Ashley worried about the ethics of what they were doing, but David assured her that I would want her to have my heart. After all, I loved her like a sister, didn't I? I had taken care of her, hadn't I? This was just the natural extension of that care. The sickening part was how he had manipulated the medical team. David had spent weeks building relationships with the staff, playing the role of the devoted husband who was struggling with the possibility of losing his wife. He brought coffee for the nurses, chatted with the doctors about my condition, and gradually planted the seeds of the idea that I was suffering more than anyone realized. He painted a picture of a woman who was in constant pain, who had privately expressed wishes that she didn't want to live if her quality of life couldn't be restored. None of it was true, but David was convincing. He'd always been good at reading people, understanding what they wanted to hear. It's what made him successful as a construction supervisor, and it's what made him dangerous as a liar. He knew exactly how to present himself as the grieving husband who was only thinking of his wife's best interests. The morning of the surgery, I had been alert enough to protest. I told Dr. Morgan that I wasn't ready, that I wanted to try other treatments first, that I didn't consent to organ donation. But David was there immediately, explaining to the medical team that the stress and medications were making me confused. He showed them documents that he claimed were my advance directives, stating that I wouldn't want to live in a diminished capacity. The papers looked official, complete with what appeared to be my signature, though I had never signed anything. Of the sort, Dr. Morgan had looked troubled, but David's performance was flawless. He broke down in tears, explaining how difficult this decision was for him, how much he loved me, but how he couldn't bear to see me suffer. Ashley stood beside him, playing the role of the supportive friend who was reluctantly accepting this generous gift. She even offered to refuse the transplant, saying she couldn't live with herself if it meant taking my life. It was a masterful piece of theater, designed to make the medical team feel like they were facilitating a beautiful act of love and sacrifice, rather than participating in murder. The last thing I remembered from my previous life was the anesthesia taking hold, the room spinning as I tried desperately to speak, to tell someone that this was wrong. But my voice wouldn't work, my body wouldn't respond, and everything faded to black. When I woke up, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating above the operating table, watching as they carefully removed my heart and prepared it for transplant into Ashley's chest. I had watched David and Ashley in the recovery room afterward, holding hands as she slowly regained consciousness with my heart beating in her chest. They were both crying, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief and joy. David kept whispering that they could finally be together, that nothing would keep them apart now. Ashley pressed her hand to her chest, feeling my heart beat, and thanked me aloud for my sacrifice. It was revolting, but somehow, impossibly, I was back. Back in my own body, back in my own life, back with the knowledge of what they had planned. This time, things would be different. I pressed the call button for the nurse, and within minutes, Sandra Williams entered the room. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had been taking care of me since I was admitted. Her face brightened when she saw me sitting up and alert. "Emma, how are you feeling today? You look so much better than yesterday." "I feel clearer than I have in weeks," I said, and it was true. The fog that had been clouding my mind from the medications was completely gone. I felt sharp, focused, and determined. "Sandra, I need to ask you something important. Has my husband brought any paperwork for you to file in my medical records? Any documents about my wishes for treatment?" Sandra looked puzzled. "Not that I'm aware of." "Why do you ask?" "I'm concerned that there might be some misunderstanding about my treatment preferences. I want to make sure that everything in my file reflects my actual wishes, not anyone else's interpretation of what they think I want." "Of course, honey. Would you like me to review your file with you? We can go through everything together, too? Make sure you're comfortable with what's documented." "Yes, please." "And Sandra, I need you to document something very clearly in my chart. I want it noted that I am fully alert, competent to make my own medical decisions, and that I absolutely do not consent to organ donation at this time. I want to explore all other treatment options first." Sandra nodded, making notes in her tablet. "I'll make sure Dr. Morgan knows about your concerns when she makes her rounds this morning." "Is there anything else troubling you?" Hesitated for a moment, then decided to plant the first seed of my plan. "I'm also concerned about some of the people who have been visiting me. I know my husband means well, but I feel like he's been under a lot of stress lately. I'm worried it might be affecting his judgment about my care. I'd like to limit visitors for a few days while I focus on my recovery." It's completely understandable. Medical decisions can be overwhelming for family members. I'll make a note that you'd prefer to rest without visitors unless you specifically request them. After Sandra left, I lay back in the hospital bed and began to plan. I had 3 days to prevent David and Ashley from succeeding in their scheme. But more than that, I had the opportunity to turn their plan completely against them. They wanted Ashley to have a new heart. Fine. But it wouldn't be mine, and the cost of getting it would destroy everything they thought they were building together. The first step was gathering evidence. I needed proof of David's deception, documentation of his forgeries, and a way to expose the affair that would destroy his credibility with everyone who mattered. In my previous life, I had been too trusting, too willing to believe that the people I loved had my best interests at heart. This time, I would verify everything. I reached for my phone, grateful that David hadn't thought to take it away from me. He probably assumed I was too weak and confused to use it effectively. I opened the voice recorder app and began documenting everything. I could remember about the conversation I had overheard between David and Ashley. Every detail, every word, every emotion I had witnessed. This would be crucial evidence later. Next, I sent a text message to my sister Rachel in Sacramento. Rachel had always been suspicious of David, though she had never been able to put her finger on exactly why. She was a nurse herself, working in the cardiac unit at UC Davis Medical Center. And she had medical knowledge that could help me understand exactly what David was planning. Rachel, I need you to come to Portland as soon as possible. Something's happening with my treatment that I need to discuss with you. Don't tell anyone you're coming, especially not David. Just come. Her response came back within minutes. 8. My way will be there tonight. What's wrong? I'll explain everything when you get here. Just trust me for now. The next several hours passed slowly as I waited for evening. David appeared in the doorway around lunchtime, carrying flowers, and wearing the concerned expression that I now recognized as completely fake. He had perfected that look, the devoted husband worried about his ailing wife. In my previous life, it had fooled me completely. Now it made my stomach turn. How are you feeling today, sweetheart? He asked, settling into the chair beside my bed. You look tired. I'm actually feeling much better, I said carefully, clearer than I have in days. I've been thinking about the surgery, and I have some concerns. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. What kind of concerns? I want to get a second opinion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I want to explore other treatment options before we consider anything as drastic as what Dr. Morgan suggested. I'm not ready to give up on less invasive treatments. David's jaw clenched, and for just a moment I saw a flash of the anger that I knew lurked beneath his concerned facade. But he quickly recovered, reaching for my hand with a gentle smile. Emma, honey, I know this is scary, but Dr. Morgan is one of the best cardiac surgeons in the Pacific Northwest. We need to trust her expertise. She knows what's best for you. I'm sure she does, but I still want another opinion. I want to call Dr. Stevens at Oregon Health and Science University. Rachel recommended him. When did you talk to Rachel? The question came out sharper than he intended, and I could see him mentally scrambling to regain his composure. I texted her this morning. She's coming up tonight to discuss my options with me. She has more experience with cardiac cases than either of us do. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out how to handle this development. Rachel's presence would complicate everything. She would ask hard questions, demand to see documentation, and worst of all, she would be an advocate for my actual wishes, rather than the narrative David had been crafting. Don't you think you should focus on resting instead of worrying Rachel unnecessarily? He said finally. She has her own life, her own job. We shouldn't burden her with this. She's my sister, David. She wants to be here. I want her here. He turned back to me, and I could see him calculating his next move. Of course, if that's what you want, I just think we should be careful not to delay your treatment while we're getting additional opinions. Dr. Morgan was very clear about it. The timing. What exactly did Dr. Morgan say about timing? She said that your condition could deteriorate rapidly, that we need to be prepared to act quickly if your heart function declines. I knew he was lying. Dr. Morgan had been optimistic about my prognosis with proper treatment. My condition was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. David was trying to create a sense of urgency to prevent me from seeking alternatives to his plan. I'd like to speak with Dr. Morgan myself about the timing without anyone else present. I want to make sure I understand my options completely. David's face went pale. Emma, you're not thinking clearly right now. Medications, the stress. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, I interrupted. Clearer than I have in months, actually. I want to take control of my own medical care. And I want to make sure that all my decisions are truly my own. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him reassessing everything. The devoted husband act was slipping, and underneath it, I glimpsed the calculating man who had been planning my death. But he wasn't ready to abandon his plan yet. He still thought he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you think is best. Just want you to get better." But as he leaned down to kiss my forehead, I caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't love or concern. It was the cold assessment of a predator whose prey had become unexpectedly difficult to catch. He was already planning his next move, figuring out how to regain control of the situation. After he left, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and dread. I had successfully planted doubt about his narrative and bought myself some time. But I had also revealed that I was much more alert and suspicious than he had expected. From now on, he would be watching me carefully, looking for ways to undermine my credibility and reassert his control over my medical decisions. The afternoon stretched on endlessly as I waited for Rachel's arrival. Every time a nurse or doctor entered my room, I wondered if David had gotten to them, if he was already working to convince them that I was having psychological issues related to my condition. I knew he was capable of it. He had spent years studying people, learning exactly how to present information to get the response he wanted. Around 6 o'clock, Rachel finally appeared in my doorway. She looked exactly as I remembered her from my previous life, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her nursing scrubs wrinkled from the long drive from Sacramento. But her expression was full of concern and determination, and I felt a wave of relief at seeing someone who was truly on my side. "Emma," she said, rushing to my bedside. "What's going on?" "Your text scared me." I looked toward the door to make sure we were alone, then gestured for her to come closer. "Rachel, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible. But I need you to listen to everything before you decide I'm crazy." She pulled the chair close to my bed and took my hand.
Ow.
"I'm listening." And so I began to tell her everything about David's affair with Ashley, about the plan to take my heart, about the forged documents, and the manipulation of the medical staff. I told her about my death and my impossible return, about the conversation I had overheard and the papers David had prepared. I watched her face change from concern to confusion to horror as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. When I finished, Rachel sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. "Emma, what you're describing is attempted murder. If even half of this is true, David is planning to kill you. All of it is true. Every word. And now I need your help to stop him and make sure he pays for what he's tried to do." Rachel squeezed my hand tightly. "Tell me what you need me to do." Rachel's presence in my hospital room the next morning changed everything. She had spent the night in the family waiting area, refusing to leave despite the uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lighting. When Dr. Patricia Morgan arrived for her morning rounds, Rachel was ready with a list of pointed questions that immediately put the doctor on the defensive. "Dr. Morgan, I'm Emma's sister and a cardiac nurse at UC Davis," Rachel began, her professional demeanor commanding immediate respect. "I've reviewed Emma's chart and I have some concerns about the treatment timeline you've proposed." Dr. Morgan looked surprised but maintained her composure. "Of course. What specific concerns do you have?" "According to the tests from last week, Emma's ejection fraction is still at 45%. That's certainly concerning, but it's not immediately life-threatening. Yet the notes suggest you're recommending urgent surgical intervention. Can you explain the medical reasoning for that urgency?" I watched Dr. Morgan's face carefully as she processed the question. I could see her mental wheels turning, trying to reconcile what she actually knew about my condition with whatever David had been telling her about my wishes and prognosis. "Well, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy can progress unpredictably," Dr. Morgan said slowly. "While Emma's current numbers are stable, we've seen cases where patients deteriorate rapidly." "Have you seen indicators of rapid deterioration in Emma's case specifically?" Rachel pressed. "Because looking at her test results, I'm not seeing the markers that would typically suggest imminent decline." Dr. Morgan glanced at me, then back at Rachel. "I believe Mr. Rodriguez mentioned that Emma has been experiencing increased symptoms at home, shortness of breath, chest pain, fatigue that's been interfering with her daily activities." "David said that," I interjected, making sure my voice carried the right note of confusion. "But that's not accurate. I haven't been having those symptoms. In fact, I've been feeling relatively good until this recent episode." The room fell silent as Dr. Morgan processed this information. I could see her beginning to question the narrative she had been given. Rachel seized the moment to press further. Dr. Morgan, has Mr. Rodriguez provided any documentation of Emma's symptoms, symptom diary, or reports from her primary care physician? He mentioned that Emma had been reluctant to document her symptoms because she didn't want to worry. The family, Dr. Morgan replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Rachel and I exchanged a look. The web of lies was already beginning to unravel under scrutiny. Dr. Morgan was a competent physician. When presented with actual medical facts rather than David's emotional manipulation, she was starting to see the inconsistencies. "I'd like to request a complete cardiac workup," I said firmly. "Echo, stress test, cardiac catheterization if necessary. I want a full picture of my current condition before we discuss any surgical options." Dr. Morgan nodded slowly. "That's certainly reasonable. I'll order the test for this afternoon." She paused, looking troubled. "Emma, I want you to know that any treatment decisions are ultimately yours to make. No one else can make those choices for you." After Dr. Morgan left, Rachel turned to me with a grim smile. Phase 1 complete. Now she's questioning everything David told her. But we need to be prepared for him to escalate his manipulation.
Yes. She was right.
Within an hour, David appeared in my doorway with Ashley at his side. This was the first time I had seen Ashley since my rebirth, and the sight of her made my skin crawl. She was exactly as I remembered her, petite and blonde with a deceptively fragile appearance that masked her calculating nature. She played the role of the grateful family friend perfectly, but now I could see the predatory intelligence in her eyes. "Emma, sweetheart," David said, his voice dripping with false concern. "The nurses told me you were having some anxiety about your treatment. I brought Ashley along because I thought she might help calm your nerves." Ashley stepped forward with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Emma. I know this must be so scary for you. When I went through my own heart issues, I was terrified too. But you're in such good hands here. The audacity was breathtaking." She was actually going to stand there and commiserate with me about heart problems while planning to steal my heart. I forced myself to smile back, playing the role of the trusting friend. "Ashley, I had no idea you were dealing with heart problems too. What kind of condition do you have?" I watched her face carefully as she calculated her response. She couldn't reveal too much without raising suspicions, but she needed to establish enough medical credibility to support their eventual plan. "Dilated cardiomyopathy," she said finally. "It's been manageable with medication, but the doctors say I'll eventually need more aggressive treatment." "How long have you been dealing with this?" Rachel asked innocently. "It must be such a coincidence that you both developed heart conditions around the same time." Ashley's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I've had it for several years. I just haven't talked about it much because, it's scary to face." "Several years?" I repeated, as if puzzled. "But David, you never mentioned that Ashley had heart problems when she moved in with us. If I had known, I would have made sure she was getting proper medical care." David shifted uncomfortably. "Ashley's very private about her health issues. She didn't want to burden anyone with her problems." "That's so like you, Ashley," I said sweetly. "Always putting others first, but you shouldn't suffer in silence. Rachel here is a cardiac nurse. Maybe she could recommend some specialists in the area for you." Rachel picked up my cue seamlessly. "Absolutely. What's your current ejection fraction, Ashley? And are you seeing a cardiologist here in Portland? Or are you still working with doctors in San Diego?" Ashley looked like a deer caught in headlights. She clearly hadn't expected to be questioned by a medical professional, and she was struggling to maintain her story without revealing information that might expose the plan. I'm not sure about the exact numbers," she stammered. "I try not to focus too much on the technical details. It just makes me more anxious." Rachel nodded sympathetically, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Any patient with a serious cardiac condition would know their ejection fraction and other key metrics. Ashley's vagueness was a red flag that confirmed everything I had told Rachel. "Well, since you're both dealing with heart issues, maybe we should make sure you're both getting the best possible care," Rachel suggested. "I could review both of your cases and make sure you're with the right specialists." The panic that flashed across Ashley's face was unmistakable. "Oh, that's so kind. But I wouldn't want to impose. I'm sure Emma needs all your attention right now." David stepped in quickly. "Yes, let's focus on Emma's treatment. That's why we're all here." But I wasn't done yet. "It's actually Ashley, since you understand what it's like to live with a heart condition. Maybe you could help me understand something. Dr. Morgan mentioned that treatment decisions are very personal. Have you ever had to consider organ transplantation as an option?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Ashley's face went pale, and David's jaw tightened visibly. They had walked into a trap, and they knew it. "No, my condition isn't that severe," Ashley said weakly. "Oh, that's good news," I said brightly, because I was reading about organ donation last night, and it's such a complex process. There are so many ethical considerations, waiting lists, compatibility issues. It must be terrifying for patients who actually need transplants. Rachel was watching the exchange with fascination, clearly seeing the psychological warfare playing. Out in front of her, the waiting lists are incredibly long, she added helpfully. Most patients wait months or even years for a compatible donor. And of course, the ethical guidelines are very strict about how donations can occur. David had heard enough. "I think we should let Emma rest now. All this medical talk is probably stressing her out." "Actually, I feel fine," I said calmly. "In fact, I feel clearer than I have in weeks. Rachel and I were just discussing getting a second opinion on my treatment options. We don't need to complicate things by bringing in other doctors." "But David, wouldn't you want me to be absolutely certain about such a major decision? After all, we're talking about my heart." I let the words hang in the air, watching as both David and Ashley processed the double meaning. Ashley suddenly grabbed David's arm. "Maybe we should let Emma and her sister have some privacy to discuss things. Family decisions are so personal." They practically fled from the room, leaving Rachel and me alone. As soon as they were gone, Rachel turned to me with wide eyes. "Emma, did you see Ashley's reaction when you mentioned organ donation? She looked like she was going to be sick." "She knows that her only chance of getting a heart is if something happens to me," I replied grimly. "And David knows that his plan is falling apart." Rachel pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my colleague at OHSU. Dr. Stevens owes me a favor, and I want him to review your case immediately. If David is planning something for your scheduled surgery day, we need an independent medical opinion on record." While Rachel made her calls, I began implementing the next phase of my plan. I opened my laptop and started documenting everything. Every conversation, every lie, every manipulation I had witnessed. But more importantly, I began researching Ashley Williams. In my previous life, I had been too trusting to dig into her background. I had accepted her story about being a yoga instructor going through a difficult divorce, needing a place to stay while she got back on her feet. What I found was disturbing. Ashley had indeed been married, but not to some businessman in San Diego as she claimed. She had been married to Dr. Richard Chin, a cardiac surgeon at Scripps Memorial Hospital. Their divorce had been contentious, with Richard filing restraining orders after Ashley had allegedly threatened him in vandalizing his medical practice. More interesting was Ashley's medical history. According to public records from the divorce proceedings, Ashley had been diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome, a psychological condition where patients fabricate or induce illness to gain attention and sympathy. Richard had discovered that many of Ashley's supposed medical emergencies during their marriage had been self-induced or completely fabricated. Ashley was a master manipulator who used fake or induced medical conditions to control the people around her. Relationship with David wasn't about love. It was about access to what she needed. She had targeted our family specifically because of my heart condition. Seeing an opportunity to get the transplant she had probably been planning for years, I also discovered that Ashley had been in contact with several other families dealing with cardiac issues over the past 2 years. There were posts on social media where she had befriended wives and mothers of heart patients, always positioning herself as the understanding friend who knew what they were going through. "Dr. Stevens is coming in tomorrow morning to evaluate you personally. He's also bringing a colleague who specializes in cardiac ethics. They want to review your case and David's claims independently." Perfect. "But Rachel, I need you to see something." I showed her what I had discovered about Ashley's background, watching her face grow pale as she read through the court documents and medical records. "Emma, This woman is dangerous. She's not just trying to steal your heart. She systematically planned this whole thing. Look at this pattern of behavior. She's done this before. Which means we have everything we need to expose her, I said grimly. But we need to be careful. If they realize we know the truth, they might try to accelerate their timeline. That afternoon brought new developments that confirmed our suspicions. Emma, I wanted to talk to you privately, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. I know you've been having second thoughts about your treatment, and I understand how scary this must be. It helps to talk to someone who understands what it's like to have heart problems. That's exactly why I wanted to share something with you, she continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. When I was first diagnosed, I was terrified too. I went through all the stages of denial, anger, bargaining. But eventually, I realized that fighting the inevitable only makes things worse. I bit back my revulsion at her manipulation and played along. What do you mean? Well, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is accept our fate and try to make something good come from it. Like if something were to happen to me, I would want my heart to go to someone who really needed it. Someone young. Someone with their whole life ahead of them. The sheer audacity took my breath away. She was actually sitting in my hospital room, suggesting that I should accept death so that she could have my heart. And she was framing it as an act of love and generosity. It's a beautiful way to think about it, I said carefully. Have you made arrangements for organ donation? Ashley's eyes lit up with what looked like genuine excitement. Oh yes. I've been on the donor registry for years. David helped me update my information when I moved to Portland. Even discovered that we have compatible blood types, which is such a coincidence. Compatible blood types? Yes, David and I are both O-negative, universal donors. And you're AB positive, which means you could receive organs from either of us if needed. It's like fate brought us all together. I felt sick. She had just revealed that she knew my blood type, David's blood type, and her own. This level of... She had clearly been planning this for months, possibly years. Ashley, how do you know my blood type? For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw the calculating predator underneath. But she recovered quickly, laughing as if embarrassed by her slip. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened, he would know all your medical information. It was a reasonable explanation. But I knew better. Ashley had researched my medical information thoroughly, probably through David's access to my insurance records and medical files. She knew exactly what she needed to make her plan work. Well, I appreciate you sharing your perspective, I said finally. It gives me a lot to think about. Ashley leaned forward and squeezed my hand with false warmth. Emma, I want you to know that whatever happens, you have people who care about you. David loves you so much, and I think of you as the sister I never had. If there's ever anything I can do to help you or your family, please don't hesitate to ask. After she left, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The woman had just offered to help my family while actively planning to kill me and steal my organs. The level of manipulation was beyond anything I had imagined, even with my memories of what had happened in my previous life. That evening, Rachel returned with more disturbing news. I spoke with Dr. Richard Chen, Ashley's ex-husband. Emma, that woman is even more dangerous than we thought. Rachel told me about her conversation with Richard, who had been relieved to finally have someone listen to his warnings about Ashley. According to Richard, Ashley had been obsessed with organ transplantation throughout their marriage. Constantly researching procedures and following cases online, she had also shown an unhealthy interest in his cardiac patients, particularly those who might be candidates for heart donation. Richard said that Ashley used to volunteer at the hospital, specifically in the cardiac unit, Rachel continued. She was eventually banned from the premises after several incidents where she was found in restricted areas, accessing patient files without authorization. She was researching potential donors, I realized with horror. That's what Richard believes. He also said that Ashley had become fixated on the idea that she deserved a heart transplant, even though her own condition was largely manageable. With medication, Ashley wasn't just a woman with heart disease looking for a solution. She was a predator who had systematically targeted our family because she saw an opportunity to take what she wanted. Her relationship with David wasn't about love. It was about access and manipulation. There's more, Rachel said grimly. Richard thinks Ashley might have induced or worsened her own cardiac symptoms to make her condition appear more severe than it actually is. The implications were staggering. If she was capable of that level of self-harm, there was no limit to what she might do to ensure she got what she wanted. "We need to contact the police," I said finally. Rachel nodded. "I already have. Detective Martinez from the Portland Police Bureau is coming tomorrow morning to take your statement. But Emma, we need to be prepared for the possibility that David and Ashley might try something before then. If they suspect that we're onto them, they might try to accelerate their timeline." That night, I barely slept. Every footstep in the hallway, every opening door, every unfamiliar voice made me wonder if David and Ashley were making their move. Rachel had stationed herself in the chair beside my bed, refusing to leave me alone for even a moment. Around 3 in the morning, my fears proved justified. I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside my room, speaking in urgent whispers. David and Ashley were having an argument about something, and their voices were getting louder despite their obvious attempts to stay quiet. "Can't wait any longer," Ashley was saying. "Her sister is asking too many questions, and now she wants a second opinion. If we don't act soon, we'll lose our chance completely." "I know, but if we push too hard, it's going to look suspicious," David replied. "We need to be smart about this." "Smart? David, I'm running out of time. My heart function is declining faster than I told you. If I don't get a transplant soon, I'm going to die anyway." So Ashley's condition was actually worse than she had been admitting. Even to David, she was desperate, which made her even more dangerous. "What are you suggesting?" David asked. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. Dr. Morgan already has the paperwork. All we need is for Emma to have a medical emergency that makes the decision out of her hands." Rachel and I looked at each other in horror. They were planning to induce a medical crisis that would justify emergency surgery and organ harvesting. "How?" David's voice was barely a whisper now. "I have access to medications that could simulate a cardiac event. Nothing that would show up in a standard talk screen, especially if the focus is on heart failure rather than poisoning." Rachel was already reaching for her phone to call security, but I stopped her. We needed to hear more to get them to incriminate themselves completely. "Ashley, that's incredibly risky. If something goes wrong, what's going to go wrong? Emma has a heart attack. The doctors rush her to emergency surgery. And during the procedure, they discover that her heart is too damaged to save. It happens all the time with cardiac patients. I'll be right there, ready to receive the transplant that saves my life. And if someone suspects something, is going to suspect anything, you're the grieving husband who lost his wife despite the best medical care. I'm the family friend who was lucky enough to benefit from Emma's generous decision to be an organ donor. It's a tragic but beautiful story. I had heard enough." Rachel was already on the phone with security, and within minutes, we could hear footsteps approaching rapidly down the hallway. David and Ashley's conversation cut off abruptly, and I heard the sound of rapid footsteps moving away from my room. But it was too late for them to escape. Security had sealed the cardiac unit, and Detective Martinez was already on his way to the hospital. By morning, the entire conspiracy would be exposed, and David and Ashley would be facing charges for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit organ trafficking. As I lay in my hospital bed waiting for dawn, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I had successfully prevented David and Ashley from carrying out their plan, but the betrayal still cut deep. The man I had loved and trusted for 18 years had been willing to kill me for another woman. It was a reality that would take time to fully process, but I was alive and I was free. More importantly, I had the knowledge and evidence needed to make sure that David and Ashley paid for what they had tried to do. The next phase of my plan was about to begin, and this time, I would be the one in control of my own destiny. 6 months had passed since David and Ashley's arrest at St. Mary's Medical Center. The scandal had rocked our entire community in Maple Heights, making headlines in the Portland Tribune as the heart theft conspiracy. David was awaiting trial on charges of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy to commit organ trafficking. Ashley faced additional charges related to her history of medical fraud and identity theft. Both were being held without bail, deemed flight risks by the judge who had reviewed the extensive evidence of their premeditation. I stood in the Pearl District high-rise apartment that had become my new home, looking out at the Portland skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors, illuminating the space that represented my complete transformation. Gone was the timid housewife who had trusted blindly and sacrificed endlessly. In her place stood a woman who had learned to protect herself and build something entirely her own. The apartment was a deliberate choice, everything the Maple Heights house had not been. Where that home had been filled with memories of David's deception and Ashley's manipulation, this space was clean and modern, with no history but my own. I had furnished it with pieces I chose myself, colors I loved, artwork that spoke to me rather than what looked appropriate for a suburban wife. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, who had become not just my sister, but my closest confidant and business partner. Coffee at Bean there in 20 minutes? I have updates on the insurance settlement. I smiled as I gathered my purse and jacket. Rachel had taken a leave of absence from her position at UC Davis to help me navigate the complex legal and financial. What had started as sisterly support had evolved into something much more significant when we discovered that Ashley's pattern of medical fraud extended far beyond our family. Being their coffee shop on Morrison Street had become our unofficial headquarters over the past few months. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was a widow in her 60s who had taken a maternal interest in my story. She always reserved the corner table for us, the one with the best privacy and natural light. Today was no different as I spotted Rachel already seated with 2 steaming mugs and a thick folder of documents. The insurance company finally agreed to the full settlement, Rachel announced without preamble as I sat down. $1 million for the attempted murder and fraud claims, plus another $1.2 million for emotional distress and punitive damages. David's assets are being liquidated to cover it. I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with vindication. The money represented more than just compensation. It was acknowledgement that what David had attempted was not just betrayal, but a calculated attempt to destroy my life for financial gain. Insurance investigators had uncovered a web of fraud that extended back years, including policies David had taken out on me without my knowledge and beneficiary changes he had made while forging my signature. "What about the house?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Being sold at auction next week. The proceeds will go toward restitution and legal fees. David's construction company is also being dissolved. His business partner, Mike, is buying out David's share at a steep discount to keep the company afloat." I nodded, feeling nothing but relief. That house held too many poisonous memories to ever feel like home again. Marcus and Sophia had initially been upset about losing their childhood home, but they had come to understand that staying there would have meant living in the shadow of their father's crimes. "Speaking of Marcus and Sophia, how are they adjusting to Lincoln High?" Rachel asked, reading my thoughts. My children's transition had been one of my biggest concerns. At 15 and 17, they were old enough to understand the full scope of what their father had attempted, but young enough to still be processing the trauma of realizing their parent had been willing to murder their other parent. The family therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had been working with all of us to navigate the complex emotions surrounding David's betrayal. "Better than I expected, honestly," I replied. "Sophia made the varsity soccer team, and Marcus has found a group of friends in the robotics club. They both said they prefer the apartment to the house. Too many bad memories there." What I didn't mention was how proud I was of my children's resilience. They had initially blamed me for breaking up the family when David was arrested, but as the evidence became public and they learned the truth about Ashley's manipulation, they had rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness that reminded me why I had fought so hard to survive. Rachel opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Now, for the really exciting news. The Ashley Williams investigation has uncovered 12 other families who were targeted by similar schemes over the past 5 years. I leaned forward, my attention fully captured. We had suspected that Ashley's predatory behavior extended beyond our family, but 12 other cases was staggering. The FBI's healthcare fraud unit has been working with medical institutions across 3 states, Rachel continued. Ashley had been systematically identifying families dealing with serious medical conditions, particularly cardiac issues, and insinuating herself into their lives. In some cases, she was successful in manipulating medical decisions that resulted in patient deaths. The implications were horrifying. Ashley wasn't just a woman who had tried to steal my heart. She was a serial predator who had been murdering people for their organs. How many people died because of her? 4 confirmed cases were patients. Died under suspicious circumstances after Ashley had been involved in their care. 3 more cases where Ashley received significant financial benefits from families dealing with medical crises. And 5 cases like ours, where the schemes were discovered before they could be completed. I felt sick thinking about the families who hadn't been as fortunate as mine. Parents, spouses, children who had died because they trusted the wrong person, who had believed that Ashley was a friend trying to help them through difficult times. The federal prosecutor wants us to testify at Ashley's trial, Rachel said gently. Our case is the most thoroughly documented, and your survival means you can provide direct testimony about her methods. Of course I'll testify, I said without hesitation. If it helps put her away permanently and prevents this from happening to other families, I'll do whatever it takes. Rachel smiled with obvious pride. I knew you'd say that. The prosecutor also mentioned that there might be a victim compensation fund established from Ashley's assets and the assets of her accomplices. Could be looking at additional settlements. We spent the next hour reviewing the legal documents and discussing strategy for the upcoming trials. Both David and Ashley had refused plea bargains, apparently believing they could convince juries that their actions had been motivated by love and desperation rather than greed and manipulation. Their lawyers were planning to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife who had fabricated evidence to destroy an innocent romance. It was a strategy that might have worked if not for the overwhelming physical evidence Ashley's medical records showed. A pattern of self-induced cardiac episodes, designed to worsen her condition and make her a more compelling transplant candidate. David's financial records revealed extensive debts and gambling losses that had motivated his interest in my life insurance policies. Most damning of all were the recorded conversations we had captured, where they explicitly discussed drugging me to induce a medical emergency. After our meeting, I walked the 10 blocks back to my apartment building, taking the longer route through the Pearl District that had become my daily routine. The neighborhood was a perfect blend of urban sophistication and community feel, with art galleries, boutique shops, and restaurants that catered to young professionals and empty nesters who valued culture and convenience over suburban sprawl. The walk gave me time to think about how completely my life had transformed in just 6 months. I was no longer the woman who had defined herself primarily as David's wife and my children's mother. I had discovered interests and ambitions that had been buried for years under the demands of managing a household and supporting David's career. The most surprising development had been my partnership with Rachel in establishing the Medical Advocacy Foundation. What had started as our investigation into Ashley's fraud had revealed a massive gap in patient protection, particularly for families dealing with serious medical conditions. Vulnerable patients were often too overwhelmed by their diagnoses to properly research the people offering help and support, making them perfect targets for predators like Ashley. Our foundation worked with hospitals and medical practices to implement better screening procedures for volunteers and support staff. We also provided resources for families to verify the credentials and backgrounds of people who offered medical advice or assistance. The work was deeply satisfying, combining Rachel's medical expertise with my newfound skills in research and investigation. The foundation had received significant media attention, particularly after a feature article in the Portland Monthly magazine titled "From Victim to Advocate: How One Woman's Near-Death Experience is Protecting Other Families." The article had led to speaking engagements at medical conferences and invitations to consult with healthcare institutions across the chain's Pacific Northwest. My phone rang as I reached my building, displaying Dr. Stevens' name, the cardiologist who had provided the second opinion that helped expose David's lies. Had become not just my physician, but a trusted advisor for the foundation's work. "Emma, I have some excellent news," he said without preamble. "Your latest cardiac tests show continued improvement. Your ejection fraction is now 55%, well within the normal range." I felt a rush of relief and gratitude. The stress of David's betrayal and the subsequent legal proceedings had taken a toll on my physical health, but the combination of proper medical care, regular exercise, and reduced stress had worked wonders for my cardiac function. "Does this mean I'm cleared for normal activities?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Absolutely. In fact, I'd say your heart is healthier now than it's been in years. Whatever changes you've made in your lifestyle are working beautifully. After ending the call, I stood in the lobby of my building for a moment, marveling at the irony. David had tried to kill me to harvest my heart for Ashley, but his betrayal had actually led to better cardiac care and lifestyle changes that had improved my heart function beyond what it had been before the crisis. The elevator carried me to the 23rd floor, where my apartment occupied a corner unit with views of both the city skyline and the Willamette River. As I unlocked the door, I was greeted by the sight of fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. A weekly delivery I had started as a small luxury that reminded me daily that I was alive and free to make my own choices. I had just settled at my desk to review foundation documents when Marcus appeared in the doorway of my home office. At 17, he had grown several inches in the past 6 months and was beginning to look more like a young man than a boy. The trauma of his father's arrest had matured him in ways that both worried and impressed me. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Of course, what's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about college applications, and I want to focus on criminal justice or forensic science," he said. "What happened with Dad and Ashley made me realize how important it is to have people who can investigate crimes and protect victims." I felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Marcus had always been interested in science and technology, but his new focus seemed directly inspired by our recent trauma. I wanted to make sure he was choosing a path for the right reasons. "That's a noble goal, Marcus. But I want you to be sure you're not making decisions based on anger or a desire for revenge." He shook his head earnestly. "It's not about revenge, Mom. It's about justice. I saw how Ashley had hurt all those other families and how she almost got away with it. I realized that there need to be more people working to stop predators like her." We talked for another hour about his college plans and career aspirations. I was struck by his maturity and thoughtfulness, his genuine desire to use his experience to help others rather than simply to punish those who had wronged us. The conversation reminded me that while David's betrayal had caused immense pain, it had also revealed strengths in my children that I might never have discovered otherwise. That evening, Sophia joined us for dinner in the apartment's dining room, which offered a stunning view of the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing dusk. At 15, she had handled the family crisis with remarkable grace, channeling her emotions into her soccer training and academic achievements. Mrs. Patterson asked if we wanted to cater the Foundation's fundraising event next month, Sophia announced as she helped herself to the tie. Takeout we had ordered from our favorite restaurant in the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson had become an unofficial member of our extended family, and her coffee shop had become a gathering place for Foundation supporters and volunteers. The idea of having her cater our first major fundraising event was perfect. Combining business with the personal relationships that had sustained us through the difficult months? "That's a wonderful idea," I replied. "Did she mention what she was thinking for the menu?" "She wants to do a Pacific Northwest theme with local ingredients. Salmon, artisanal cheeses, craft beer from local breweries. She said it would represent the community support that makes the Foundation possible." The fundraising event was scheduled for the following month at the Portland Art Museum, the proceeds supporting our efforts to expand patient advocacy services to smaller hospitals and rural medical facilities. We had already confirmed several prominent speakers, including Dr. Stevens and Detective Martinez, who had become a strong supporter of our work after seeing how Ashley's case connected to other healthcare fraud investigations. After dinner, I retreated to my bedroom and called my mother in Sacramento. She had been planning to move to Portland to be closer to us, a decision that filled me with anticipation. Having family nearby felt more important than ever after learning how isolated and vulnerable I had been during my marriage to David. "How are the real estate searches going?" I asked after we had exchanged pleasantries. "I found a lovely condo in the Hawthorne district," she replied. 2 bedrooms, walking distance to shops and restaurants, and only 15 minutes from here? Apartment. The seller is motivated, so I think we can close within a month. The thought of having my mother nearby brought a sense of completion to the new life I was building. During my marriage, David had subtly discouraged visits from my family, claiming they were disruptive to our routine. I now realized this had been another form of control, keeping me isolated from people who might have questioned his behavior or offered alternative perspectives. "I can't wait to have you here, Mom. The kids are excited too. They've already started planning which restaurants they want to take you to. I'm looking forward to being part of your daily lives again," she said warmly. With the foundation work, after everything that happened, I feel like I need to do something to help other families avoid what you went through. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed. 6 months ago, I had been a woman defined primarily by her relationships to others, existing in the shadow of her husband's ambitions and deceptions. Tonight, I was someone who had built her own career, her own home, her own purpose in the world. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when I questioned whether I had the strength to build a new life from scratch. There had been moments when the betrayal felt so complete that I wondered if I would ever trust anyone again. But gradually, with the support of Rachel and my children and the growing network of people connected to the foundation, I had discovered that I was stronger and more capable than I had ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text message from James Thompson, the attorney who had helped establish the foundation and who had become something more than a professional colleague over the past few months. James was a widower in his early 40s, intelligent and kind, with a quiet strength that reminded me of everything David had pretended to be, but never was. "Dinner tomorrow night? I found a new restaurant in the Alberta Arts District that I think you'd love." I smiled as I typed my response. "I'd love to. Pick me up at 7. 6 months ago, the thought of dating would have been impossible. Had been too broken, too suspicious, too focused on simple survival, to imagine opening my heart to anyone new. But James had been patient and understanding, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, always respectful of the trauma I was processing. Our relationship was still in its early stages, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than the desperate passion that had characterized my relationship with David. James knew my full story, had seen me at my most vulnerable and angry and determined. He admired my strength rather than seeking to control it, encouraged my independence rather than trying to diminish it. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I thought about the strange gift that David's betrayal had given me. In trying to destroy my life, he had actually freed me from a marriage that had been slowly suffocating me for years. His attempt to take my heart had led me to discover that I had a much stronger heart than I had ever known. The woman who had trusted blindly was gone, replaced by someone who verified everything and protected herself first. The wife who had sacrificed endlessly was gone, replaced by someone who understood that her own well-being was the foundation for everything else she wanted to build. The victim who had been manipulated and controlled was gone, replaced by an advocate who used her experience to protect others from similar predators. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the legal proceedings continued and the foundation work expanded. There would be difficult testimony to give and painful memories to relive in service of justice. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in a home I had chosen, surrounded by people who valued and respected me, building a future that was entirely my own creation. The last thing I saw before falling asleep was the photo on my nightstand, showing Marcus, Sophia, and me at the Foundation's launch event. We were standing together, arms around each other, smiling with genuine happiness, despite everything we had endured. It was a picture of survivors, of people who had looked into the abyss and chosen to build something beautiful instead of being consumed by darkness. In the morning, I would wake up in my own space, make my own decisions, and continue building the life that David had tried to steal from me. But tonight, I simply rested in the knowledge that I had not only survived but prevailed, and that the best chapters of my story were still being written. 2 years had passed since the trials concluded with David receiving a 25-year sentence and Ashley being convicted on federal charges that would keep her in prison for life without the possibility of parole. The verdicts had brought a sense of closure, but what came next surprised everyone, including myself. Ashley's health had deteriorated rapidly in federal prison, her heart condition worsening to the point where she now desperately needed the very transplant she had tried to steal from me. I received the call on a Tuesday morning while reviewing grant applications for the Medical Advocacy Foundation in my Pearl District office. Dr. Stevens' voice carried a mixture of professional obligation and personal discomfort as he delivered the news that would change everything once again. Emma, I need to inform you about something that's both medically relevant and personally complicated. Ashley Williams has been placed on the National Organ Transplant waiting list. Her condition has progressed to end-stage heart failure. I set down my coffee cup, processing the irony of the situation. The woman who had tried to murder me for my heart was now facing the same fate she had planned for me, desperately hoping that someone else would die so she could live. How long does she have without a transplant? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. 6 months? Possibly less? The prison medical facility is doing everything they can, but her options are extremely limited. Federal inmates have restricted access to transplant programs, and given her criminal history involving organ trafficking, most medical centers have declined to place her on their lists. The ethical implications were staggering. Ashley was dying from the same condition that had made her target me, but her own actions had eliminated almost all possibilities for legitimate treatment. It was poetic justice on a scale that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Dr. Stevens, I need you to know that I hold no responsibility for her current situation, I said firmly. Whatever medical decisions are made regarding her care, they need to be based on standard protocols, not on any consideration for my feelings or our history. Of course, Emma, I'm only informing you because there's been a development that directly involves you. I felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of development? Ashley's attorney has filed a petition requesting that you be contacted as a potential organ donor match. They're claiming that since you were originally intended to be her donor, there might be some legal or ethical obligation for you to consent to donation now. The audacity was breathtaking. Even from prison, facing death, Ashley was still trying to manipulate the system to get my heart. Her lawyer was essentially arguing that, because she had planned to murder me for my organs, I now owed her those organs voluntarily. That's legally absurd, I replied, though I knew Ashley's desperation would make her try anything. Completely absurd, and every medical ethicist I've consulted agrees. But the petition has generated media attention, and some advocacy groups are arguing that denying her treatment based on her criminal history violates medical ethics principles. I understood the broader implications immediately. Ashley's case was becoming a lightning rod for debates about healthcare access for prisoners, the ethics of organ allocation, and the question of whether someone's past actions should affect their eligibility for life-saving treatment. These were legitimate ethical discussions, but they were being manipulated by Ashley's legal team to create public pressure for me to donate. What does the petition specifically request? You two undergo compatibility testing and consider direct donation if you're a match. They're also requesting that your medical records from 2 years ago be reviewed to determine if your heart condition has improved enough to make you an eligible donor. The strategy was clever in its manipulation of public sympathy.
Ashley's
Lawyers were painting her as a reformed woman who had recognized the error of her ways and was now humbly asking for the same gift she had once tried to take by force. They were framing my potential refusal as vindictive rather than rational self-protection. Dr. Stevens, I want you to document very clearly in my medical records that I do not consent to any compatibility testing related to Ashley Williams, and I do not consent to any organ donation to her under any circumstances. My decision is based on my own medical best interests and my right to bodily autonomy. I'll document that immediately. Emma, I want you to know that the medical community overwhelmingly supports your position. What Ashley attempted was a violation of every principle of medical ethics, and her current situation is a direct consequence of her own criminal actions. After ending the call, I sat in my office overlooking the bustling Pearl District, contemplating the strange turn of events. Ashley's deteriorating health was undoubtedly genuine. Federal prisons didn't have the resources or incentive to fabricate medical conditions for high-profile inmates.
Okay.
But her legal strategy showed that she remained the same manipulative predator. She had always been willing to exploit any system or situation to get what she wanted. My assistant Jennifer knocked and entered with a concerned expression. "Emma, there are 3 news vans parked outside the building, and I've received 17 media requests in the past hour. Should I refer them to our standard media contact?" The story had already broken, which meant Ashley's legal team had coordinated their petition with a media campaign designed to pressure me into compliance. It was exactly the kind of calculated manipulation I had come to expect from Ashley and her supporters. "Set up a press conference for this afternoon," I decided. "I want to address this directly rather than letting the narrative be controlled by people with their own agendas." Jennifer nodded and began making calls while I prepared my response. The Medical Advocacy Foundation had given me a platform and credibility that I hadn't possessed during the original trials. I was no longer just a victim telling her story. I was an established advocate with expertise in healthcare ethics and patient protection. I called Rachel, who is now serving as the Foundation's Director of Medical Ethics, to discuss strategy. She had anticipated this development and already prepared research on similar cases where convicted criminals had attempted to claim special consideration for organ allocation. "Precedent is clear," Rachel told me during our emergency meeting. "Prisoners have the same basic right to health care as any other patient. But they don't have special claims to specific donors or expedited treatment. Ashley's legal team is trying to create a new category of obligation that doesn't exist in medical ethics." What about the media angle? Probably going to frame this as a story about forgiveness and redemption, which is exactly why. We need to reframe it around patient autonomy and protection from coercion. You have an absolute right to make your own medical decisions without pressure from criminals who previously attempted to murder you. The afternoon press conference was held in the Foundation's community meeting room, with representatives from major news outlets and medical journals in attendance. I had prepared carefully, consulting with both legal experts and medical ethicists, to ensure my statement was both principled and unassailable. I want to address the petition filed by Ashley Williams' legal team requesting my participation. In compatibility testing for organ donation, I began, looking directly into the cameras. This request represents a fundamental misunderstanding of medical ethics and patient rights. I explained the principles of voluntary consent in organ donation, emphasizing that donors must be free from coercion or pressure, especially from those who had previously attempted to harm them, detailed Ashley's pattern of medical fraud and manipulation, including her targeting of multiple families for organ trafficking schemes. Ashley Williams is not asking for my forgiveness or seeking redemption, I continued. She is attempting to complete the same crime she was convicted of 2 years ago, using legal and media pressure instead of forged documents and induced medical emergencies. The questions from reporters were predictably focused on themes of mercy and second chances, but I was prepared for each one. I emphasized that true mercy meant ensuring Ashley received the same standard of care available to any prisoner with her condition, not special consideration that would violate the rights of potential donors. My decision to refuse compatibility testing is not about revenge or punishment, I explained. It's about protecting my own health and maintaining the integrity of organ donation systems that must be based on voluntary consent rather than legal manipulation. The press conference generated significant coverage, with most medical professionals and ethicists supporting my position. However, Ashley's legal team had succeeded in creating enough controversy to attract support from advocacy groups focused on prisoner rights and criminal justice reform. Over the following weeks, I received hundreds of messages from people on both sides of the issue. Supporters praised my courage in standing up to manipulation and coercion. Critics accused me of lacking compassion and allowing my personal feelings to override moral obligations to save a life. The most disturbing messages came from people who seemed to believe that Ashley's criminal conviction was somehow less important than her current medical need. These messages revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both medical ethics and personal responsibility, suggesting that victims had ongoing obligations to those who had attempted to harm them. James, who had become my partner in both personal and professional endeavors, provided steady support throughout the media circus, As an attorney specializing in healthcare law, he understood both the legal and ethical dimensions of Ashley's petition. "What concerns me most is the precedent this would set," he told me during one of our evening walks along the Willamette River. "If Ashley succeeds in creating legal pressure for you to donate, it opens the door for other criminals to make similar claims against their victims." Exactly. It would essentially create a new form of victimization, where surviving an attempted murder would create ongoing legal obligations to the perpetrator. The situation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Patricia Morgan, my original cardiologist at St. Mary's, requested a meeting. She had remained supportive throughout the legal proceedings, testifying about David's manipulation and Ashley's fraudulent medical claims. Her request to meet privately suggested new developments. We met at Bean Their Coffee Shop, our old meeting place that had become symbolic of the support system that had sustained me through the crisis. Dr. Morgan looked uncomfortable as she settled into her chair, clearly struggling with whatever she needed to discuss. "Emma, I need to share some information that's medically relevant but ethically complicated," she began. "Ashley's medical team has requested access to your cardiac test results from the original hospitalization, claiming they need to verify your suitability as a donor. It's completely inappropriate. My medical records are confidential, and I've explicitly refused consent for any involvement in her care. I agree completely, and I've refused their request. But there's something else you need to know." Dr. Morgan paused, clearly struggling with her next words. "Ashley's condition may not be entirely natural." I felt a chill of recognition. "What do you mean?" "The pattern of her cardiac deterioration is consistent with someone who has been manipulating their own treatment. Missed medications, dietary violations, possibly even induced stress on her cardiovascular system. It's similar to what we suspected she was doing before her conviction. Implications were staggering. Ashley might be deliberately worsening her own condition to create urgency around her transplant request and generate sympathy for her legal petition. It would be consistent with her history of medical manipulation and her willingness to harm herself to achieve her goals." "Is there evidence of this?" "Nothing definitive. But the prison medical staff has noted several incidents where Ashley was found with contraband items that could affect her cardiac function. Energy drinks, stimulants, even cleaning chemicals that could stress her system. If ingested in small amounts, Ashley was literally killing herself to try to manipulate me into saving her." The realization was both horrifying and enlightening, revealing the depths of her psychological pathology and her continued willingness to use self-harm as a weapon against others. "Dr. Morgan, I need you to document your concerns about potential self-induced medical deterioration. If Ashley is manipulating her condition to create legal pressure for organ donation, that needs to be part of the official medical record." The meeting ended with Dr. Morgan agreeing to file a formal report with both the prison medical authorities and the Organ Allocation Oversight Committee. Ashley's petition for special consideration would be evaluated in light of evidence that she might be deliberately worsening her own condition for manipulative purposes. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I reflected on the strange symmetry of the situation. Ashley had spent years manipulating medical systems and vulnerable families to get the heart transplant she wanted. Of her own actions, she was continuing to manipulate systems and attempt to coerce victims. But this time, I was not the helpless patient lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by people I trusted who were actually planning my death. I was an informed advocate with legal representation, medical expertise, and a support system that understood the true nature of Ashley's manipulation. The woman who had tried to steal my heart was now dying from the same condition she had used to justify her crimes. But she would not get my heart through legal manipulation any more than she had gotten it through attempted murder. Some gifts cannot be stolen, and some mercy cannot be demanded. Justice, it seemed, had its own sense of irony. The call came. On a cold December morning, exactly 3 years after Ashley had first entered my life as David's supposed friend in need, Dr. Stevens's voice was professional, but carried an undercurrent of satisfaction that told me everything before he spoke. The words, "Ashley Williams died at 3:17 this morning at the Federal Medical Facility," he informed me. Her heart finally gave out. The prison medical team attempted resuscitation, but her condition had deteriorated beyond intervention. I stood at my office window, watching Portland's early commuters navigate the frost-covered streets below, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Relief was paramount, but it was tempered by something unexpected, a profound sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. Was she ever able to find a donor match? I asked, though I suspected the answer. No. Her criminal history and continued behavioral issues in prison made her ineligible for most transplant programs. The few facilities that initially considered her case ultimately declined after reviewing the evidence of self-induced medical complications. Ashley had died as she had lived, a victim of her own manipulations and lies. Her desperate attempts to worsen her condition had backfired, making her an unsuitable candidate for the very procedure she had killed for. The medical community had seen through her final deception, just as they had seen through her original scheme. Dr. Stevens, was her death investigated by prison authorities? Standard procedure for any federal inmate death. The preliminary findings suggest natural progression of her cardiac condition, accelerated by non-compliance with medical protocols and possible substance abuse using contraband materials. Even in death, Ashley remained true to form. She had essentially killed herself through the same kind of medical manipulation she had used against others, destroying her own heart in a futile attempt to claim someone else's. Jennifer appeared in my doorway with a gentle knock. "Emma, there are media requests coming in about Ashley Williams. How would you like me to respond?" "Prepare a brief statement expressing that justice has been served through natural consequences, and that our foundation remains committed to protecting patients from medical predators. No interviews, no commentary beyond that." The media attention would be brief but intense. Ashley's death would be framed by some as a tragedy of the criminal justice system failing to provide adequate health care. Others would see it as the inevitable conclusion of a life spent manipulating and harming others. I preferred to focus on the productive work that had grown from the ashes of her crimes. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, now a sophomore at Portland State University studying criminal justice as he had planned. "Saw the news? Are you okay?" I smiled at my son's continued protectiveness. At 19, he had grown into a thoughtful young man whose experiences with his father's betrayal had shaped him into someone deeply committed to protecting others from similar predators. "I'm fine," I texted back. "Come to dinner tonight if you can. I'm cooking." Sophia, now a senior in high school and captain of Lincoln's varsity soccer team, sent her own message. "Good riddance. See you at home." Daughter's blunt assessment captured the family's general sentiment. We had all moved forward with our lives, building something positive from the wreckage Ashley and David had created. Their absence felt like freedom rather than loss. Rachel arrived for our weekly foundation meeting carrying coffee and her characteristic blend of professional focus and sisterly concern. The Medical Advocacy Foundation had grown beyond our wildest expectations, now operating in 4 states and preventing dozens of cases of medical fraud and patient manipulation. "The Williams case officially closes today," she announced, settling into her chair. The FBI's final report documented 37 families that were targeted by Ashley's network over 8 years. Our protocols have been adopted by over 200 medical facilities. The scope of Ashley's crimes had been staggering once federal. Investigators had the resources to trace her full pattern of behavior. She had been responsible for at least 6 deaths and had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from families. Dealing with medical crises, the Foundation's work had grown directly from the recognition that the healthcare system needed better protection against such predators. "What about David's appeal?" "Denied. He'll serve his full sentence." The parole board noted that he's shown no genuine remorse and continues to claim he was manipulated by Ashley. Rather than accepting responsibility for his own choices, David remained as delusional in prison as he had been in our marriage. Unable to accept that his actions had been driven by greed and selfishness rather than love or desperation, his continued denial had actually helped my healing process, confirming that the man I had grieved for never really existed. James arrived for lunch with flowers and news that our partnership had taken another step forward. The law firm where he worked had agreed to provide pro bono legal services for Foundation clients. creating a comprehensive support system for families dealing with medical fraud and manipulation. "There's something else," he said with a smile that suggested good news. "The Oregon Medical Board has approved our proposal for mandatory training on patient protection protocols. Every healthcare facility in the state will be required to implement our screening and verification procedures." The victory was more meaningful than any personal revenge could have been. Ashley's death had closed one chapter, but the systems we had built would prevent other families from experiencing what we had endured. Her legacy would be the very protections she had tried to circumvent. My mother joined us for dinner that evening, bringing her own perspective as someone who had watched our family rebuild itself from destruction. At 72, she remained sharp and engaged, serving as the Foundation's volunteer coordinator. An unofficial grandmother to every patient family we served. "I never thought I'd say this," she reflected over dessert, "but I'm grateful for what happened 3 years ago. It's not the trauma, but the strength it revealed in all of you." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of person I would have become if Dad had been who we thought he was. Would I have cared as much about justice and protecting people?" "You would have found your path," I assured him. "Good people become good people, regardless of their circumstances. Ashley and your father made their choices, but those choices don't define us." Sophia looked up from her homework, which she was completing at the dinner table, despite repeated suggestions that she use her desk. "Do you think Ashley knew she was dying when she made that last legal petition?" It was a perceptive question. From my 17-year-old daughter, who had inherited her grandmother's sharp insight into human nature, I think Ashley spent so much time manipulating her medical condition that she lost track of what was real and what was performance. In the end, she destroyed the very thing she was trying to save. As my family scattered to their evening activities, I found myself alone with the satisfaction of survival and transformation. The woman who had been targeted for murder 3 years ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had converted trauma into purpose, betrayal into advocacy, and near death into abundant life. Ashley Williams had died alone in a prison. Medical facility, her heart failing because of her own manipulations. Her schemes having ultimately destroyed only herself. David Rodriguez remained incarcerated, his appeals exhausted, his reputation permanently destroyed. Their attempts to steal my life had instead freed me to build something far better than what they had tried to take. I stood on my apartment balcony, looking out at the Portland skyline illuminated against the winter night. Somewhere in the city, families were gathering around dinner tables, children were doing homework, couples were planning their futures, and the ordinary magic of life continued. Protected now by systems that would prevent others from falling victim to predators like Ashley and David, my heart beat steady and strong in my chest. The heart they had tried to steal, now powering a life they could never have imagined or destroyed. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through transformation. Not through death, but through abundant life, lived in service to others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to protect vulnerable families from medical predators. But tonight, I simply rested in the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is living well. And the strongest justice is the refusal to let evil define your story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.